Hi, and welcome to Walking the Way. I'm Pastor Chris Serber. I am the senior minister of First Congregational Church of Naples, Florida, and also the founder and director of a mission organization called Supply and Multiply, which brings the gospel and the compassion of Jesus Christ around the world. Today, I'm joined with my friend, Pastor Andy Stinson, and we're going to talk about a few things today. We'll see how the Lord leads, but in particular, this having been or is his 25th anniversary of ordained ministry, I want to talk about maturing in ministry, the experience of full-time professional ministers, you might say, really, that applies to all kinds of folks trying to serve the Lord with faithful commitment. And also, and closely related, I definitely want to hear a little bit about Pastor Stinson's thoughts on pilgrimage and the value of it as he's about to go on a really substantial pilgrimage coming up soon. So good morning, Andy. And why don't you tell the folks just a little bit about who you are, and we'll get into this.
Hey, good morning, Chris. Boy, this is fun. I just love, talking with you is like eating candy. So it's really a great opportunity to spend some time together. So I just a little bit ago had my 25th year of anniversary of ordination. I grew up in Maine. I joined the Army Reserves at 17 years old, very young, and had a 26-year career in the Army Reserves, 15 of it as an Army chaplain. Kind of received the call to ministry, partway in my late 20s, and graduated from seminary in my 30s. And so now here we are, kind of coming into my 26th year of ministry. I've spent about half of it in pastoral ministry and about half of it in institutional ministry, whether it was in the Army chaplaincy on active duty, or whether it was in hospitals, or I spent some time doing hospice care. So I've had a kind of varied career in terms of both the care of the soul in institutional settings and in the pastoral setting. So 2011, I did a tour in Iraq as the senior medical chaplain in the AJOA, and so that brought with it a whole lot of ministry experiences as well. So, and a couple of years ago, I did a pilgrimage on the Camino de Santiago, and with a group called Warriors on the Way, and I'm getting ready here in May to go to a pilgrimage called Warriors to Lords, which is a 5-day pilgrimage of 25,000 combat veterans that come from 40 different nations to go to Lords and seek healing, both for themselves, but also for the wider world in terms of
Yeah.
war. So,
That's
uh,
beautiful. I looked it up a little bit when you told me about it, and that is incredible. If there is anything, maybe it's indirectly related to this conversation, but I tell you what, I think that it is beautiful when opportunities are cultivated to help veterans, especially combat veterans, to reorient themselves on mission. Because I'm convinced I've done a fair amount of reading of late and listened to some different podcasts and some people talking about, PTSD and how one of the primary components that seems to be coming to light as far as the treatment of that. A lot of times people think, it was the hard things we did and saw. But I'm not a combat veteran. I mean to imply that, but I served 10 years on active duty, and nobody's a bigger supporter of those who saw combat than me. And you know, it's not just what you saw or what you had to deal with, right? It's like you were trained to be a sheepdog, and a sheepdog. I once had a Saint Bernard, and I always say the worst thing I ever did to that dog is not give her a job. So she got busy chewing up my shoes, literally. And it's like, man, get a new mission. You're at you got all this training. When I found out that Chuck Swindoll had been a Marine, it gave me a whole nother idea. I'm like, oh, so God uses Marines too. I'm not the only one. And in fact, I can't tell you how many guys are in the pastoral ministry that are veterans. I know so many that are veterans. And so anyway, God bless that. That's incredible. So this is your 26th year of ministry. For me, I've been active in ministry since the early 2000s. I guess I'm more like coming up on 20 years since being ordained and pastoring, real life churches. And I tell you, there's so many lessons that are to be learned. And it seems to me that the most mature thing I ever did as a professional minister, if there is such a thing. I like to think of myself as unprofessional. Somebody came to the church not long ago. They said, "I sure do like your pastor, but he's not very sophisticated." I was like, "Yes, that's what I want to hear." Because a guy like me who is terminally educated, I don't want to seem like I'm too sophisticated to comprehend. And if there's anything that I learned, it was like, oh, I'm always in development. I'm just another guy on the pilgrimage. So these two themes are tied so closely together. What do you think about over all these years? It occurs to me that as in the Christian life in general, and perhaps in particular in Christian ministry, that it is the fiery furnace experiences, it's the trials that make us. And here's a quick thought, and then I'll just throw it to you for I'm very curious to hear what you think on this subject. It seems to me like the words of the Congregational Puritan Thomas Brooks, really come to bear on this. He said, "A Christian is refined by affliction. As gold is tried in the fire, the more the fire, the purer the gold." What do you think about what would you say maybe are some specific examples or general experiences in your ministries where trials and challenges and facing a new situation that has helped you or continues to help us to grow in ministry?
Yeah, I think, well, just to dovetail off of what you said a second ago, because
Yeah.
I was having dinner with one of the people that were on my search committee 6 years ago in this here, and he had he finally got to the point where he could admit to me, he says, of all the candidates we interviewed, you were the least polished, and I was like,
Yeah, yeah.
and I
That's
was
the
like,
best.
but he says you were the most authentic. Like you were,
Yes.
and I think if there is something to take in ministry that over kind of the long haul and over what happens in terms of the maturation of ministry and the refinement that comes from that is
Mm.
this this profound and difficult willingness to kind of let down the stained glass kind of appearance of things. And this is not to like because and you have to be extremely careful with that because it's not about you don't want to bleed all over your congregation and you don't want to give
Right, right.
people that's all kind of pretty irresponsible. But there's a way in which
Make them your opportunity for free therapy. Yeah.
exactly like and you see people
Yeah.
do it,
Yeah, you
and
do.
but there is a way in which the ability to be vulnerable and at the
Yeah.
same time, as somebody said, show them your scars, not your wounds. And
Mm.
I think there's but and ability to be authentic in ministry, and to really and to mean it. And what that
Mhm.
often means is that the trials that come, uh, at least in my experience, I think the trials probably no one else would have identified them as trials.
Yeah.
Nobody else would have like pointed at it and said, "Oh, that was a really hard time in ministry." Every once in a while, I mean, I can think of times in ministry where, we had the suicide of a 12-year-old,
Oh, yeah. Stuff
and
like
just
that. Yeah.
crushing of what that did to a small community, what that did to those parents, what that did to those people,
Mm.
and walking and being really close to that and walking that out with people, and there's just ways in which that's just but in some ways, that's a heavy load, but we're kind of built to carry that load.
Yeah.
There is a way in which but when you walk with kind of the rock in the shoe, or you walk in with in ways that it's not because another kind of old saw, it's not the weight that kills you, it's how you carry it.
That's
And,
right.
and this, and ministry, the real trials come from this, I think, in part, and the refinement piece is so key because and it really speaks, I think, to the whole spiritual life, that the spiritual life is
Yeah.
not about adding more things. And we imagine that it is. Like, I need to add more prayer. I need to add more discipline. I need to add more grace. I need to add more patience. I need to add more
Right.
gifts to the Spirit. It's actually not that. That the life of the Spirit and the life of, and I think the life of the Christian is really about the removal of things. It's
Yeah.
really about the removal, it's, God kind of removing some of our shortcomings, removing some of the things so that kind of the glory that's already implanted in us, that's already flowing through us, has the opportunity to shine a little more, and that we can have. And I think the thing that I find most is that in the maturation of that is just the trust and the confidence in that you can have the bad day, or you can miss the mark, or you can just
Right.
and know that, okay, there's this great story between Sherman and Lee, and they get it's one of the battles before they come east, and about, I think it's Shiloh, and they get they get shattered the first day, and they're kind of talking about it, and as Sherman was, he's kind of a little more high strung than Grant, and he's kind of like, well, we got to get him here, and Grant's just kind of whittling on a piece of wood, and he says, well, we'll lick him tomorrow, and
Right.
and it's just like, there's this way in which you're like, okay, we'll look them tomorrow. Like there's this way in
Yeah.
which of understanding that you really, the Spirit really is working with you, and they're really, that God really is in it with you, even when and it's not and that's not a feeling state. Like that's not a
Right.
like always feeling in the joy down in my heart. Like it's not that experience. It's
Yeah.
this kind of enduring knowledge that you know that you really are well placed, and that God has worked into the equation all of your stupidity, the fact that you're not going to, that God
Yeah.
knows
Yeah.
how stupid you
God
are,
even
God knows
uses
how
that
silly you are.
sometimes.
Right,
Yeah. He
and
really
that's an
does.
integral part of the that's an integral part of the cake that's getting prepared. So yeah, and it's, I think, for me, as I look in that refinement, it really is this kind of long journey of God kind of slowly taking these things. No, like, no, 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 you don't need that. Like, stop worrying about that. You don't need to, I've got, like, claw marks on it as God's trying to take it from me half the time.
Yeah.
But there's this way of just kind of working with our soul that kind of, and in it, because I think the fear is often that, like, whether it's just either that we're not enough, or that we're not good enough, or that
Yeah.
we're not, we have all those kind of the shame bound things that are within us, and that there's not enough within us, there's not enough,
Yeah.
and there isn't, but that God places enough, that God flows into us, and the Spirit flows into us and fills us in a way that there is an embarrassment of riches that's available, that
Oh, yeah.
kind of comes to us. But that requires getting some things out of the way. That requires us letting go of some things in order to step into that reality.
Oh, I have found this is I'm so glad that it coincided with some things that we could talk about today, because I have become much more keenly aware of how much more God is able to use me and more effectively the less equipped I get for ministry. I almost want to say it that way. It's like, I love to, and part of my whole fitness journey in the last few years, I got back to ruck marching, and I have a pack with 50 pounds of sand in it. It started out as an old recruiter giveaway that I had from when I was an Army National Guard recruiter, and this backpack was falling to pieces. And the day I decided that's enough, I got to lose this weight, I just went out to my garage and I filled this old, recruiter giveaway backpack I just put it on a scale and I started putting things in it until it weighed 50 pounds, parts of a lathe, wrenches, and it was digging into my back and it hurt. And the first time I went and rucked on the beach, not terribly far from here, 5 miles in the soft sand. I'm like, we're getting back into Marine Corps, but we're going to lose this weight. And the wrenches are digging into my back. And I'm like, it's supposed to hurt. And just all that nonsense. And then finally my wife's like, hey, listen, I ordered you a real backpack and that you can put some actual. And I'm like, all right, I'll do it. This one's hurting my back pretty bad. But when I think about that, though, when you were talking, I was thinking, it's like there was a time in pastoral ministry, perhaps motivated more by fear of failure than by honest passion for the people, which was always present, but always in the back. There was the Chris, that's still the knucklehead kid from Modesto, California, that was like, I don't want to fail. I want to be successful. I don't want to fail. And always putting more in the pack until the pack weighed so much that I can't even carry the doggone thing. And I'm putting so much pressure on myself to minister into the lives of others. And then it's like, oh, wait a second. I'm not walking alone. I'm rucking this out, and Jesus is standing right here next to me, telling me, "Hey, what are you doing with all that? You don't need to carry 37 commentaries in your head in the pulpit. I'm gonna send the Holy Spirit." And the authenticity piece that you said, it seems to me like almost an overused word these days, authentic, real. But I tell you what, I know for sure that the ministry God chooses to make through me gets better the more honest I am. Like for years, I thought I love boxing. I grew up boxing. I love the martial arts. They have nothing to do with ministry. Oh, wait a second. Yeah, they do. I can use those. Right now, there's like 7 or 8 people on any given Sunday that are in this church because they're friends of mine. And I didn't go to jujitsu to evangelize. I just was me. And some people are like, hey, I'll check it out. I'm on a spiritual journey, or hey, here's a Christian who seems like I had a guy on a jujitsu mat one time. He said, man, you must be the coolest pastor around. You're down here rolling around jujitsu with a bunch of savages like us. And I'm like, I don't know if I'm the coolest one around, but I just know I need to be here too.
Right.
Just like you need to be here, because I got demons that I wrestle with. I got all the same stuff you got. I just happen to have been ambushed by Jesus, and now I'm walking a different path. You know, get the realer I get, like you said, not to bleed all over everybody. That's a good way to put it too. Not to bleed all over everybody, but like, I had a guy tell me one time, if I'd have had a pastor like you sooner, I think I'd have gone into ministry, because you make me realize that I could do it too. And like, I could take that as an insult, but,
Exactly.
but I was like,
Well, if
yeah,
he
you're
can do
right,
it, like,
man.
hey, how about
Yeah,
me?
yeah. Yeah, but yes, absolutely. God
Yeah,
uses real
exactly.
people,
Exactly.
and yeah, 100%. So yeah, there's so many. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, it's we're in our Bible study right now. We're working through Acts, and it's just one of these profound. We were talking about the different, just the temperament and the character of the different
Yeah.
apostles. So we're talking, Peter,
Oh yeah, yeah.
with his ministry, and Paul with his ministry, and how they're radically different, and yet the whole of them kind of make up the body of Christ. And this
Right.
remembering that we are a part of the body, and we're that one little cell. We're that one little part that's a part of wherever we are, and that our job is to be the healthiest little cell that we can be in that place, and
That's
in that
right.
and function as well as we can in that, and that to let ourselves off the hook of not trying to be the eye or not trying to be the hand, like be.
Yeah.
And that when we do that, like everything is glorified, like everything else works better, like when
Yeah.
your head doesn't hurt, everything else in your body works better. It's just that
Right.
kind of thing. And because there's this, that, and it's present, it's in the present and early church, it's present now, and it's present in all of us, of kind of this how do like, oh well, some of you like this guy and some of you like that guy, and it's we hang ourselves up on that, but really the
Yeah.
ability to be, and I agree with you. Like the authenticity thing is just, I just hate. I mean, I almost hated using that word to start
Yeah.
out
Yeah. Yeah.
because it's so like. But the thing is here's the thing: is authenticity is. I think it's been dressed up with this idea of like, well, I'm just going to wear a t-shirt and sweatpants because I'm just being authentic. Well,
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
actually,
Oh
no,
yeah.
you can actually authentically put on a suit before worship and come to
Yeah.
worship well
Absolutely.
prepared, because in fact, that is actually a gift and a gift to God. That is actually, that you're actually living out a spiritual discipline when you show up there in such a way that we can, we've been given a line where anything that actually might be better is somehow false, and that
Oh
that
yeah.
quite the opposite, and I just love the ruck marching journey because I'm on the same one. I mean, we're on a lot of parallel
Yeah.
tracks because
You.
I
Yeah.
did the same
You
thing.
look good. I can see that. Yeah.
Years
You're
ago, yeah,
making
well,
some
2 years
progress
ago, I did
too.
180 miles in the Camino de Santiago.
Oh man.
15 mile, 15, 20 miles a day, with a group called Warriors on the Way, and and I had to train up for that. And I was significantly heavier when I made the commitment to do it. And I'm like, okay, this is going to be the thing. And I did the same thing. I went out and I still have my old frame ruck from when I was in the
Yeah,
infantry.
the old
Like,
Alice
so, I
pack.
mean,
That's awesome.
we're talking early 90s, like late
I
80s.
wanted one of those, and I could barely find one that wasn't so vintage that it cost too much. I
Yeah.
was like,
Like,
but
no,
I
I
want
still,
one. Yeah.
and I loaded that baby up with freaking plates, and and that was my training ruck,
Oh
and I
man.
still, so the other thing that's on the, and I'll challenge you if you're
Yeah, yeah.
interested. But they have what's called the Beacon to Bourne. So Bourne is the
Hmm.
national cemetery down in Massachusetts. It's 65
Okay.
miles, and they leave on um, midnight on the Saturday before Memorial Day,
Huh.
ruck all day Sunday, and then come in at 9 o'clock on Memorial Day, and it's a 30-hour ruck straight
Oh
through,
man.
65 miles.
I would
Um,
love to do that.
so yeah, I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to do it this year because of the Lord's trip and how that's all going to play out, um well, I'm just like, but and I share all that just not to say
Yeah.
like, hua hua, but
Yeah,
to
yeah.
maybe say a little bit, but
A little bit, a little bit.
a little
Yeah.
bit, but it's to say that because I'm just so struck by what you're talking about and how kind of that that is integral to who I am in ministry.
Yes.
Those are not these are not like, this is the thing I do on the side so that I can kind of keep my head right or whatever.
Right.
This is really the expression of who this kid, that joined the army when he was 17 years old, like who, and the end expression of where you come to with um and it's really, I think, the power of I mean, to go back to the Brooks quote of, the refining is really is it's not it really is pure gold in the sense that it stops being it stops being a thing that you have to polish. It stops being a
Right.
thing you have to craft, you have to work on. We were talking a little bit before about kind of sermon preparation, and you and I have a
Yeah.
similar style in that of like, we'll do a bunch of work and get our thoughts right, but then, I mean, when I step into the pulpit, it's also like it comes with some heat. Like it comes with
Yeah.
like it's been formed, but then that which is formed gives way to, hopefully, the presence of the spirit of the word being preached,
Yes.
and that those are and that has evolved over time. Like, I didn't start there by any,
Right.
I've gone through about every stylistic kind of idea
Yeah.
you
Me
could,
too.
with
I've read
preaching.
every book in seminary. My DMin is in preaching, and I read yeah, I tried the 4-page sermon. I tried the outline. I've tried everything and then I've just gone in and pulled a ripcord. The only trouble is some of those sermons people were fed, but they were stuffed because they were there too long. So
Sure, yeah, right.
I can't do too much of that.
Yeah, and,
Yeah.
and it's all, and I think, all of that is, because I mean, it's just, I can't think of a more holistic practice, I think, than in the sense of, whether it's ministry or
Yeah.
even, and I think this just transfers to the Christian life. Like the Christian life, you're not just a Christian husband, or you're not just a Christian kind of shows up on Sunday. You're not just a guy that goes to a job and tries to do good things because there is this way in which, God has placed us perfectly in all these places and is working,
Yeah.
and that who we are and who we are becoming in that maturation process is, are people who can, well, they can handle a little more meat than milk, and they can do a
Yeah.
little more than they could before. And so, I find that more and more as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I tell you what, there's a man who comes to church here now, and what a beaut. I mean, I could unpack his story. It's so beautiful, so many the ways God's worked in his life, and I tell you, not only did I not pick up jujitsu as another martial art in order to try to evangelize. I mean, I'm always open to whatever God does. But in the beginning, it almost was like, yeah, this is just for me and my sons to improve our martial art. And after a while, it's like I had heard this thing from a retired pastor. He said, you never can retire from being a pastor. Even if you retire from pastoring churches, it becomes what you are, because if you've lived it consistent with your calling doesn't go away, because you don't get a paycheck from a church or whatever. And we were at jujitsu one night, and this was one that long ago, and there's a new guy, and he goes, my jujitsu professor with his who comes to church here, him and his whole family, now with his thick Brazilian accent, he tells this guy, "Hey, you gonna roll with Pastor Chris?" And he goes, "Oh, he's a pastor," and you can see almost as if he was like, "Oh, cool, this is gonna be easy," and then he goes, "Hey, but don't get the wrong idea. You better defend yourself, or he's gonna try to kill you." And then this man who is a wonderful friend of mine, he leans over and he says, "That's why he's my pastor." And I thought, and because this guy's a tough guy, right? Like tough guy. And I tell you what, right there on the jujitsu mat, my eyes swelled up with tears. And I was like, oh, thank you, God. I can't believe I came into this just thinking it's just something I was going to do. And as in all things, whether it's with my participation or a little bit of reluctancy, you chose to use me in his life. And what he was saying, I know him well. What he was saying was, I just wouldn't be able to hear somebody's voice if I thought they were a weak. I hate this. You're not weak because you don't do jujitsu. You know what I'm saying? But
No,
he
yeah.
wouldn't be able to hear somebody's voice if they weren't on the grind like him. And so, yeah, so there's people that God might send to me that if I'm real, if I'm being me, and I'm not, like you said, putting up, trying to view me through the stained glass, sir. If I'm not trying to do that, that he can hear. And then there's guys that would come to me and be like, man, that guy's a weirdo. And they might go and resonate more with you, like, because you're also a tough guy, but maybe you come across, maybe your voice is, maybe you speak a language that they need to hear, right? Like so the authenticity thing, yeah, it's the only reason that's a bad word to us, I think, is because there's so many people who propping up a kind of false authenticity. Like Charles Spurgeon said, humility is a difficult thing to grasp. Speak of it as if you have it and it vanishes. Same thing.
Oh, that's
Authenticity is
beautiful.
the
Yeah.
same way, Um, yeah, that's all. I tell you what, I had a question here for you, but I'm gonna skip it and move on because you kind of already answered it. Okay, here, quick thought. It strikes me, and we're kind of already in it a little bit, that joy and suffering are a part of the calling to minister to others. And we're talking more about in the context of so-called professional ministry, but if you desire to allow God to use you to minister to anybody, these principles apply regardless of your station in the church, deacon, guy in the last pew who just showed up, whatever. But the tendency for all people is to go after the joy and resist the suffering. Washington Gladden, the Congregational minister, put it this way: the path to spiritual greatness is not through ease and comfort, but through labor, sacrifice, and I love this phrase, self-forgetfulness. What do you think about that? What do you think about embracing the suffering?
Oh, absolutely.
What
Yeah.
do you
I mean,
think about that?
and it's right out of Paul's call as well. I
Yes.
mean, Ananias is going down, Ananias is like, God speaks to Ananias, says, go heal Paul. And he's like, I know this Paul guy. And he doesn't, like, we're not going to do that. He says,
Right.
do it because, and this God says, because he's going to preach to Gentiles and kings, but he's also going to suffer greatly.
Oh
and
man.
and that like it's right there. I mean, that's Washington Gladden's words. Like, it's going, like, there is, and it is my experience of this life is that it is the hardest and the easiest thing I've ever done
Right.
every day. And it's the most
Oh,
bizarre, like every day, the single, like, to do that thing that needs doing, that to eat the frog the first day part of the day, or whatever it is that is,
right.
you know, it is consistently the hardest thing I've ever done. I've done a few things, and
Yeah.
same time, it is the most um, providence filled, most kind of grace filled, most wonderful kind of life that I could ask for, and they both exist at the same time. And I
Absolutely.
think,
Isn't it amazing when the providence of God shows up in the most, right? Like
yeah,
the actual straight answer to prayer that just happened. I can't get into the details of it. That just happened with regard to some of our mission work. I mean, like we're praying on Thursday and something that can't possibly happens on Friday. And you say, oh gosh, let me never forget that he shows up.
right. Yep. Yeah, exactly.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
And even in the smallest and greatest of things,
Hmm.
it's kind of always easier to see them in the bigger things, I think,
Yeah,
sometimes. But
for
even in
sure.
the, like, you get caught in traffic 3 times and then you pull in at just the right time.
Right.
You make it to the
Right.
hospital at just the perfect time, or you get in the, and that doesn't always happen, but
Yeah.
it happens enough. It happens
Yes.
this way in which, and to know that kind of that hand is always kind of at work in it, and to know that there's this, that one of my favorite theologians, says that, Swedenborg, he talks about
Mm,
when, like, if you're in the flow of providence, it is as if you are being drawn down a river,
mm,
by the current, and that
mm,
every once in a while you'll have to paddle a little bit, but by and large, you are being drawn. The current. You have aligned yourself with the current of where the river is going, and that it's
mm.
taking you down this path. And part of the temptations of life is maybe getting a little connected to the, like, oh, I like this view on the shore and I don't like that
Right.
view, so I'm just going to I'm going to try to stay in this place, but to really, but he says that's the experience of life when we kind of align ourselves with the flow of God, and I don't live there all the time by any means, but I occasionally do get to have the experience, and
Oh,
but
well,
I
if
but I
your
know it.
overall inclation is to trust
Right.
that process
Right.
though,
And
right?
I know
That's
that
yeah.
that's always underneath. That's the thing, is I know
Yeah.
that even if I'm not, like, if I'm not in it, it's still, even if my own ego or whatever has gotten in the way, like, I
Right.
know that framework is still is working, is still at work and still providing for
Oh
me,
man.
still knowing God's
That's
provision.
beautiful. That's a beautiful way to put it. I like that very much. I'd like to know more about that particular theologian too. You have to send me the name. I recognize that name, but I don't believe I
Yeah,
know much
yeah,
about
he's
it.
a, he's a deep dive, like, but yeah.
Well, I tell you, when you're talking, I I think I think to several years ago, I was pastor of a First Congregational church in Peru, Illinois, and a close family. I mean, a close family, like I consider this the patriarch of this family, as it were, sort of the closest thing to a father, that God has ever put in my life. I could call him right now, and
Wow.
and and such a and one weekend, it happened to be the weekend I decided what my doctoral project for my DMin would be on human suffering and the sovereignty of God. And in one weekend, on a Saturday morning, I did the funeral for his grandchild who had been essentially stillborn. Many details, too much for right now. Later that afternoon, I officiated a wedding of a cousin of the same family, and did my best to be the cheerful Pastor Chris that people like at weddings. And then the next day, we ended up not doing it because of the gravity of the weekend. But then another close family friend who was supposed to dedicate their baby the next morning, we ended up postponing it. And at that funeral, I can't tell you that I said a word that was, what can you say?
Yeah.
I wept with them for an hour. I wept through, I said words probably incomprehensible. And I thought, oh, I failed this family. That sermon was, what was that? And it was many touch points after when I realized, oh, wait a second, that was weeping with those who weep and mourning with those who mourn. And if my religious ego, if the Pharisee that wants to live in me had been present, it would have meant far less. And
Mhm.
I could have said all of the profoundest words, and it would have meant nothing. because therein lies something like authenticity. Man, I'm broken over this too. Let's just get together and weep a minute. And I tell you, again, like you don't want to be bleeding all over everybody, telling them all my childhood trauma every Sunday, but it's like, there's a certain maturation in ministry that comes with with being willing, like you said, and that's the hardest part, I think, for Pat, especially all of those of us like you and I that are well educated, and we've got so-called credentials, and we've got a background, and you and I held ranks in the military, and we're somebody, and it's like, no, no, you want that, then you don't get Jesus. You want that? You don't get power in your ministry. If there was any young minister could hear anything, I would say something like that. Get all that education and then do what an old mentor of mine, when I met him, he was a retired Presbyterian pastor, been pastor in churches for 45 years, had an MDiv and a THM from Princeton Theological Seminary. And this man, while I was actively working on my master's degrees, says to me, the first thing you're going to have to do in ministry, unlearn most of what they taught you in seminary. I'm like, you could have told me that before I spent all this money. But it's like, I understood what he meant. He meant integrate that education with reality and with the spiritual life, and then God can do something with it.
And it's again, I can't remember who said it, but the line that it's we must learn the rules so that we can break them properly.
Yes, that's the best.
Because they need to be
the best.
Right.
Right. Properly.
My education formed me in a particular way. And I'm grateful for that formation. But if all I do is ever remain within that formation, I'm completely missing the mark in terms of what it really is, cocoon and butterfly kind of thing. Like it really is.
Yeah.
There's this
That's a good way to put it.
But you have to be formed, you have to go, you have to be formed as you have to be formed as a caterpillar if you're going to be a butterfly. Like you got to learn how to chew the leaves. You got to learn how to do all the things. None of those things are going to help you in your life as a butterfly, but you've got to do them in order to go through the transformation that gets you there. And I think that, it's that difference between like, I was a wrestler, you're a martial artist. Like, if I think about throwing a single leg, it's too late. Like you just you figure
we
out
should get together. We need to get together and roll sometime.
Yeah.
Get you back on a mat.
Yeah, I'd love to. I'd
Yeah.
But that's the whole thing. Like, that we have to learn how to break the rules properly. And that's really, and I think that's the beauty of, like, we want to talk about what the maturation in ministry looks like, that's what it looks like there are boundaries to keep, but sometimes you have to just shatter those boundaries because they're you need to be, the strongest person in the room sometimes, but sometimes you need to be the weakest one because
that's right.
That's the only avenue everybody else in that room is going to be to access their own weakness. Like, there's no, and that's not all up to us to figure out, but that really is to just trust the prompting of the Spirit and the guiding of what's already been formed.
Have you ever experienced? Do you ever feel? You just begged this question. At least in my mind, have you ever experienced or felt where? Gosh, how do I phrase it? It just happened to me last week. Where there's a thing that the Holy Spirit does, where it's almost like sometimes when I'm really properly yielded and willing, and I allow the Spirit's promptings, some people call it a flow state, perhaps. I'm right now trying to unpack some thoughts about the muse and that concept from Greek literature and so on, and how it integrates with life in the whole. Like, I think that they were stumbling onto something that's more properly understood as the indwelling of the Holy Spirit. Anyway, I'm trying to unpack that. I'm unpacking that right now for some thoughts that I keep ruminating over. You ever, isn't that a strange thing when there are times like I'm trying to go a certain way with a sermon or in counseling, and then it's just like, oh, I'm going to now, now I'm watching the Holy Spirit do something through me.
100%. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I've done, so when COVID started, we were off the platform for 11 weeks here, it's Massachusetts. It was
Yeah.
very, it was, there was a lot of reaction. So we were,
Right.
so I started doing I did a daily live stream. So every
Mm.
day I did a live stream on Facebook Live so that
Yeah.
I could see
Awesome.
people pop up and I could say their name because I knew there were people who weren't going to hear anybody say their name if I didn't
Right.
say it that day, and I did that
Yeah,
for
I
about
mean,
80
that's
days straight.
meaningful. Yeah.
So that has now that merged into a live stream that I do 3 times a week.
Mm.
And I've been doing that since. I think there's close to 900 now in the can, I think, of those
Oh,
live
that's
streams.
all. Oh,
So,
wow. Yeah. Yeah.
so I call them 11 minutes, 11 minutes at 11:11. They're never 11 minutes, but they're whatever they are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
but they there's this way in which to like, and it has been a journey in exactly what you're talking about. I will roll in sometimes with absolutely no idea of
Yeah.
what that live stream, what either the
Yeah.
people in that live stream need to hear from me, from what I need to bring to that live stream, but if I'm just faithful and walking it out, there is this way in which, and I have some little, you know, rituals to
Yeah.
I mean, entice the muse, if you want to use
Yeah.
the,
Yeah. 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 Right.
to
Yeah.
kind of invite the muse in, and like once those start to happen, there's, I mean, in 5 years, it hasn't really failed me yet. I mean, some are better than others, obviously. Like, I don't,
Right.
every day can't be a home run, but
Yeah.
there are ways, but it's been this incredible kind of trusting that process
Oh
that.
gosh, that's so frightening too for a control freak like me. And the more I do it, like yeah, I absolutely that I have this. I remind myself a lot when I'm trying to go there. Again, I love Spurgeon. I've always studied Spurgeon, and Spurgeon said that a prepared preacher is more important than a prepared sermon.
Yeah.
And that hit me. That hit me like a ton of bricks when I read that, however many years ago.
Right.
If I
And I
come,
think,
yeah.
right, but if you go back to our training, like it was all about the prepared sermon.
Oh
It
yeah.
was all about the, like, do the things and the exegesis and the stuff, and that was, again, you had to start there because you had to,
Yeah.
but because that is all part of not preparing the sermon. Eventually, that discipline is really about preparing the preacher. But
Oh,
kind of
yeah.
now,
Yeah, for sure.
yeah,
I
now
sometimes
at that
still
place,
feel a tinge of guilt, like my seminary exposition professors wouldn't like my sermon. I'm like, so what? I think God did. Yeah.
yeah, right. Well, I mean, it's funny, I've been, like you'll get impromptu, kind of, people will ask you to speak in an impromptu
Yeah.
way, like, hey, do you have something about this? And, I said something like, I'm like, and he's like, are you always that like that? I'm like, well, it's not my first day,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. No, yes.
I mean, and that there's a trust that comes in it not being your
Yeah.
first, like, and because the hardest, like, for me, and I think it's still the thing if you want to talk about what I struggled with in ministry, and the thing I struggled with the first day, and that I continue to struggle with now, but I'm probably just better at wrestling with it, but
Yeah.
is kind of is being able to prioritize ministry tasks. The idea of, like,
Yeah.
here, you show up every day, you do the work, you have your calendar and the things that are on your calendar, but at the same time, you're the one that sets the priorities. And to say, and
Yes.
for me, every day, like, that's a little bit of like, okay, all right, Lord, put me where you need me. Like, okay, coach, put me in, like whenever I
Right.
need to clutch hit, like but at the same time, that only, like, you can't live in, I've really, it was a discovery, like, you can't live in that place because
Yeah.
otherwise you're just constantly like, it's too easily co-opted by my own desires and my ego, and,
Right.
like, and not doing the hard things, like, because then you just spend all your time doing all the fun stuff and you don't do the things that
Oh
really
yeah.
rest. And so, those, but that setting priorities of, like, okay, what's the priority of work today? What is the, and that daily kind of facing of, like, okay, these are the things that need to get addressed. These are the things that need to get done. And knowing every day that you're going to go home with critical task incomplete.
100%.
and you're going to
That's
live
a
with it.
huge
Like
part
you're
of
going to wake up at
maturing.
2 in the morning and know that there are going to be critical tasks. And if you can't,
Yeah.
I had an old Methodist who was he was one of my supervisors in seminary
Hmm.
25 years ago, and he said if you can't go home without critical tasks undone every night, like need to rethink your call. Like, and
Oh boy.
I was like,
That's it.
ha
Yeah.
ha. Yeah, yeah. And I'm like, I know, and I was so
Yeah.
arrogant then. I was like, yeah, that's you, buddy. That's not like,
I know.
and I'm like, but
Yeah.
it's alive and well today, and then there are, and then there's the times where and those moments where you miss it, which there are always
Right.
minutes that you miss it. I mean, those are the moments for our own ability to receive grace,
That's
where we
right.
just have to extend grace to ourselves and say, like, you know, yeah, I mean, you got to kind of, okay, yeah, Babe Ruth hit a lot of home runs. He also struck out a
Yeah,
lot.
struck
And
out. I
uh,
tell you that makes me that very thought is makes me more compassionate towards the Pharisees.
right,
I realized one day, I don't know what it may have been something I was reading, something I was thinking about, I don't know, but I realized, oh, wait a second. Those Pharisees, they thought they were getting it right. They were protecting truth. They were trying to protect the people, the tradition. But in the process, it is so easy. Like for you and I suspect you as well as I, with a military background especially, my great tendency is to be a full-on workaholic, full on, and that's been yes, I've had to check myself many times over the years and listen to my wife when she's like, "Hey, you realize how many hours you've been putting in lately?" And I'm like, "Yeah, but I still, I didn't visit so and so, and she could always use prayer, and I really should do that." And oh, what about that project? And then not to mention when you're a pastor and you have to manage a campus, and you're like, "Oh, the electrician's coming, and this is happening," and yeah, I wish I could remember who said it. I want to say it was Horace Bushnell, but I'm not sure. Too many of our brethren, he says of other pastors, went into ministry for a love of gardening, not for the love of men. And I'm like, yeah, I get it, I get that, but that's never been my problem. But giving yourself grace, recognizing that God is saving men, not me. You
right.
know,
That was
at a
one of my
certain point, I can't change somebody's life. I can only offer what God has, and then only that, even at my fullest ability.
Yeah, I have
Yeah.
one. So one of my pastorates was a year long. So you can guess how that went.
Yeah.
It wasn't a fit for them. It wasn't a fit for me.
Yeah.
Like nothing. Like
I have one of those too.
it was
My
time to
one
go.
unintentional interim, I
And it
call
was,
it.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was, and it was, but it was at the same time, it was one of the most, I mean, it was one for me personally, like it was one of the most difficult things for me to endure because,
Yeah.
one, I just thought it was my own lack that I wasn't I couldn't
Yeah.
put it together. But also my own lack of like discernment, like
Yeah.
how'd you end up in this place? Like how'd you end up?
That's what it
How'd you
was for
think this
me.
was a good idea? Like
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
after a
Yeah. Me
year
too.
it gets just everybody getting beat up, including, and yourself. And then
Yeah.
but the but what I got out of that, what the backside of that after a year or two of kind of licking wounds and kind of finding it, reorienting myself, was it was really the moment I realized I'm not Jesus.
Amen.
It was really the moment I realized, like, this is his ministry, this is not my ministry.
Amen.
You think you're the guy, and that's what got me into the place. It was a place that every pastor there had struggled, and I'm like, I can go
Yeah.
there and not go there. I like, I know everybody else has, but not me. Like, and
Yeah.
it was what and as much as I hate to admit it, but a long time ago now. So
Yeah.
what I needed, it was what I needed to be a
Yeah.
beginning moment. I could begin to really rely on the fact that it's his ministry, and that great, Stephen Pay image of, I don't consider myself a shepherd. There is one shepherd. I
Right.
am sheepdog. Like I listen to the
Absolutely.
shepherd's voice and I help him keep the flock together and help him keep the church together and pointed in the right direction. And
Oh yeah.
that's my job. And so my job is, so, don't don't get confused, Andy, that you're the shepherd. Like you're not. Like you don't have that kind of juice.
Right. Oh
You're just
yeah.
a sheepdog, and you sleep at his feet, and you try to keep people safe, and you try to keep them pointed in the right direction. But the most important thing you can do is listen for his voice, and that's kind
Oh,
of
I think of that the sheepdog analogy. I think of it all the time. And as a friend of mine, a good friend of mine, who was briefly the secretary for me at a church that I probably should not have said yes to, and she told me one day, I said something, this bothers me. I should be able to fix this. I don't understand why I can't fix this. And it was her that said, Chris, God made you. You're like her husband, who happens to be a SWAT officer. She said, you're just like him. You're a sheepdog, and that's why you feel so aggressive towards the wolves, and that's why you feel so much loyalty to the shepherd. And it has helped me ever since to think, oh, yeah, that's a good analogy for the a lot of what we've been talking about here brings us right to what I hope to get to before we wrap it up. This pilgrimage that you're about to go on. We've been touching on it, but really, I think providentially, perhaps the way this conversation has gone, we're talking about a pilgrimage. We're
absolutely.
talking about the pilgrimage sojourn of the pastoral life and the ministry life in general. And tell me a little bit about this thing you're going to do. This thing is intriguing to me.
So
And
Warriors to
yeah,
Lords was started in 1947. It was started as a rapprochement between the Germans and the French, then the Americans quickly kind of glommed onto it as well, and then other countries started to go, and so it happens in the middle of May, and it since that every year, it's 5 days there's a number of different things that you'll do through the course of the day. You kind of climb the mountain to the grotto. You'll do different things, but the whole idea is that Lourdes being the apparition of Mary, by as witnessed by Bernadette. If you ever the
yeah,
1943
yeah, yes,
song
yeah. I'm
Bernadette,
familiar. As soon as I saw Lords, I
yeah.
said, "What they got? Military people going there? That's not what I." Yeah,
And so yeah, so it's amazing, and there you can, if you want to go down the rabbit hole on YouTube on a lot of the testimonials of
Hmm.
people who made the journey there, and I think, for we often talk about post-traumatic stress, and I think, one thing we need to stop talking about is post-traumatic stress and start talking about post-traumatic growth,
Oh,
because the
amen.
way in which the journey is really called to be an elder warrior. Like that's the idea.
Right.
You're called to be the guy who has been there but still sits around the fire and has the wisdom of having been there and brings it
Absolutely.
to the community rather than go out and live in the tent in the woods. Like that's what
Yeah.
and I believe, like, if if war is ever going to get solved in this world, it's going to get solved by the people who have been to war and will stand in the community and say, this is what it really looks like, and this is what you're really asking of your young men, and this is and is there not another way? And if
Yeah.
if that's gonna, and that's not to say, we just need to hug it out. That is to say that is because the only people who can do that are the people who have in fact stood in that place. And
Oh,
so
yeah. That
that
absolutely.
and the hope, I think, of Warriors to Lords is that they can that the beginning elements of that can be
Yeah.
planted, because it's not just post-traumatic stress. The other thing that we've only started talking about in recent years is what's called moral injury.
Mm.
And the
Mm.
thing
Yes.
is because, and this was more my experience of encountering war, that is that anyone who spends time encountering war comes away with the taintedness of war. There is a particular there and that kind of sin, if you want to talk about it in that way, like, it will stick to you and it will hold to you, and
Sure.
there is ways in which you become, and it's simply about the fact that you're engaged in an action, you're engaged in a thing that is about breaking the shalom of the world. And
Right.
that, regardless of, you can do it for all the right reasons. It has nothing to
Right.
do with the reasons that you're doing it. It is the fact that, but when you encounter that, there is a way that it affects you.
Yeah.
Um, and so, and if you look at, go all the way back and look at how the Israelites came home from war, they were designed, they were supposed to, they couldn't enter the tent of meeting. They had to go and ritually cleanse. They had to go and do a bunch of stuff before they could come
Right,
back and
right.
rejoin their tribes. These ideas have been, and this knowledge has been deep within us all. And I think, I'm just so fortunate to have the opportunity to participate in this. And not only in my own journey, because I think when we do it, it bring we don't just do it for us, we do it for everybody. And I think
Yeah.
we do it for all those who came before us, and
Every time I hear about a veteran, especially the 21 thing and all that with suicide and so on, you know what I always think? I always think, man, what a waste of an untapped mountain of resource because
exactly.
if okay, I love the martial arts. I grew up amateur boxing, and I was joking like I was competitive nationally, but I lost a national championship fight. So I've been in the ring with savages just enough to know that I wasn't exactly one of them.
Exactly
But
right. And
I climbed the mountain to the top and realized that the mountain goat on the top had a much harder head than me, and so I've been in the ring with some of the toughest guys there are. But it wasn't until after I went to boot camp and became a Marine, then I was like, oh, I get it now. Now I understand what I was missing was a certain aggression that exists inside of me that no one had culled out of me. So I knew how to box. I still love boxing. But there was another layer that exists inside of me. Maybe we'll get technical DNA coding that hadn't been required to turn on yet. Well, it occurs to me that in an even more profound way that you take a man to combat. I suspect that something like that happens, things you didn't know inside. Now, okay, so now you realize, oh, wait, I don't just go to war. I'm a warrior.
right.
So now
Identity
you
thing.
have the
Exactly.
greatest potential resource if you can help that man or woman, if you can help them to become, you just said, the seasoned sage warrior, the poet. Why? Of course, Marcus Aurelius was a philosopher. How else can you master that energy that comes up if you don't become a philosopher?
You in Japan, you were not permitted to be a samurai until you'd either mastered calligraphy or
Yes.
you'd mastered the tea ceremony. Like you had to
Right.
have an artistic practice, and if you didn't
Yeah.
have an artistic practice, you couldn't go to war because when you broke something, you had to replace it with an equal amount of beauty.
Amen.
And so there was this
Amen.
way in which and when you broke the shalom, you had to at the same time heal the shalom. And it's like, and in stupid ways, I found that where bearing itself out in my, like I got back, I started playing ukulele of all, which is,
That's awesome,
I
though.
wouldn't want to play guitar because guitar is
Yeah.
entirely too serious, but
Oh, yeah,
like,
yeah.
and it's just ridiculous enough to have a big guy playing a small instrument. It's
I
like,
have a stick dulcimer that I occasionally play with the choir. A
yeah,
stick dulcimer is
yeah, yeah.
even well, it's in the same family as
Like
ukulele.
right
I
out of the
almost bought a
hills, that's
ukulele. I
awesome.
just did that. I just bought it last year because I was like, gosh, I just need to make more music.
Yeah.
Regardless, I just need to play an instrument again a
Exactly.
little bit.
Right. And all of
Oh
those things
man.
are a part of that. And that's, I think, you know, and I really think that the
Yeah.
power of pilgrimage in all these forms, whether it's
Can tap
Camino,
that
like I
in.
did a few years ago, or whether it's this, um, you don't have like, I resist the idea that you have to kind of go to the mountaintop to kind of get something. But there is, but it's like I think about it like seminary. Like seminary, you learn a bunch of skills, you do a bunch of stuff, you study a bunch of stuff. But what really happens in the seminary journey is identity formation. You become the
Amen.
person comfortable to stand at a cocktail party and say,
That's right.
"Yes, I'm a pastor," and I'll have
Right.
everybody move away from you on the Group W bench, and like
Yeah, that
I think
happens
all of
too.
those kind of and you
Yeah.
become formed in at least a little bit in an identity of who you are. And I think part of that is that's what pilgrimage does for us is that
Amen.
it allows us to become, to really step into who we truly are by kind of walking off the moral injury, by walking off the trauma, by walking off so that again, kind of where we started, like the spiritual life, I really believe, is not about adding more things, adding more disciplines, adding more prayers, adding more, but it is really about the removal of things and letting that the the beauty of God in the child of God shine through, and
Amen. Amen. You know what? I think that's a great place to stop. If we lived closer together, I
I
wouldn't
know,
bother you so much.
I'd be all
You
over it.
you and I are strangely cut of a similar cloth, and I listen to this. Let me close this. I think what you just said leads right into this. Gaius Glenn Atkins, who
Oh,
I love
he actually,
Congregational.
this office, he was in this
Yeah.
office.
Oh yes, you told me that.
Yeah,
Yes.
like this was his office for a good amount of time.
I desperately want someday. My wife thinks I'm so absurd with my strange love for the city of Detroit. I would love, even if only for a brief moment, when I'm a much older man, to serve First Congregational Church of Detroit, even if just as interim. One of the joys of my life was to be at their 175th anniversary a few years back and get to speak on that platform. He was once pastor there. He served there at what Fall River. What's the name of the church proper
Yeah,
where
First
you're at?
Congregational Church of Fall River.
First Congregational Church, Fall River. And a man in the church here told me he was there as a kid, and he called it Fall River Congregational Church. I was just curious what. Okay. And anyway, Gaius Glenn Atkins, while serving as pastor, which he did twice at First Congregational Church of Detroit, he wrote a little book. This comes from his book. Oh gosh, anyway, the title of the book is it's in my office. I love reading the oldest versions I can find, closest to the first print, because I'm like, there's a chance he handed this to somebody. Okay. Anyway, he said the soul that is at home in the world has ceased to hunger for the things of God. And look at this. Pilgrimage is the answer to complacency. I just found that
Oh,
this morning.
dude, there it
And I'm
is.
like, you got
That's
to be
it.
kidding me. That's exactly what I've been trying to say. And that's why I love these old guys like him or Bushnell. They always say it better. And then and make me think, man, did he steal that from me? Oh no, he's not. He's been dead so long. But he put my idea, and apparently
Yeah,
an idea he discovered that God gave both of us perhaps in those words. For me, it's part of why I love mission, why I loved living in Haiti, as hard as that was, and why I love going on mission and taking people on trips. And because you think, sometimes the short-term missionary, the short-term mission trip is sort of, looked down upon by full-time missionaries. I think it's a huge mistake. First of all, every full-time missionary started out as a
right,
short-term missionary,
exactly.
but also, you know, you get to go be a blessing, do what it is you're going to do, even if it's the most basic mission trip and you painted a house and you visited a school, right? Um, but what you did is get away from your context and ask God to equip you somewhere where you maybe don't know the language, where you don't understand things, and it provides an instrument of relief for the complacency of daily life. So I'll be praying for you, and that's all that's fantastic. And man, God bless you today. I'm so glad. Thank you for taking the time to have this
Oh,
conversation. I
good.
know my church and your church and anybody who sees this can be blessed by this. And I'm just praying that this, I got started messing around with this a few years back during COVID, and I thought, okay, I should try more digital stuff. And then people say, hey, they're good. Keep doing them. And a guy around here bought me some new equipment, and so we'll do this again. And I just and then I kill two birds with one stone. I get to hang out with you, and this conversation I know will be a blessing to somebody. So thank you for taking the time to do it, and I'll be praying for you on that. But anything you want to share as we wrap it up, and then we'll close it out.
Uh, just that, I think we've talked a little bit about, kind of this life of ministry and maturity in ministry, and
Yeah,
that can get a little exclusionary in terms of the conversation, I think. But to really, I mean, we just sit in a different seat
that's
in
right.
the worship space, but we're all in the worship space, and that
Yes,
the pilgrim journey is every single person's journey, and that
amen.
that this and that it's my hope that just kind of what we've gleaned from being either maybe a little more just trying to pay attention a little more to it because that's kind of our role,
Right.
that can really inform and bless other people's journey, because this is nothing we are doing is exclusionary or
That's
unique
right.
to the life to kind of walking out the life with Christ.
Oh yeah, I say to people all the time when anytime someone says, "Man, that's awesome," you're dedicated full time and you do all this, I say, "Hey, you know what? In all reality, being a full-time pastor is kind of a cheat code for being a Christian
Right.
because now I have the opportunity every day to open my Bible. I have a reason that's obvious that, and yeah, I like to think of it the way that I remember watching that movie Patch Adams, which based on a true story, of course, the Gesundheit Institute that Robin Williams played in back in the 90s, maybe. And I remember at a certain place, Robin Williams' character is trying to say, here's a different way to do medicine. And he says something just like this. I'm paraphrasing it. He said, the doctor is a learned friend along the journey, not someone to lord it over people's health and whatever. And I think of the pastoral life
Oh, that's
exactly
right.
the same way. I'm a learned friend and I'm on the same, we're walking this out together, brother. And I'm going to learn from you. And I just hope you can learn from me. And the pilgrimage is going to be arm in arm as we follow after the Master of Mercy, walking stick in hand, having strapped on our sandals to walk in his footsteps together and imitate him in the world. And it's like, who better to try to remind folks of that than ecclesial descendants of the actual pilgrims that brought this
Right.
way of thinking to the new world. Yeah. Hey, God bless you today. Have a great afternoon,
You
and
too.
I look forward to hearing, and I'll pay attention for follow up from your trip.
Awesome.
Awesome. Thanks, brother. Have a great day.